Come play with us, Johnny. Forever, ever, and ever, and ever.
Man, this remake sucks. But it's still better than the made-for-TV movie. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and downright notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below. It'll give you a pretty good sense of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about. But in short, what we're going to do is look at a particular subgenre of horror and then examine 3 movies from that subgenre. Today, the subgenre we're examining is horror remakes. And we did this a little bit earlier when we did the American remakes of foreign horror films, which specifically looked at American remakes as foreign horror films, basically movies that were made in a foreign market and then just remade in English. This is a little bit broader than that. This is horror remakes, movies that, classic movies usually, that have been remade for a younger audience, kind of going back to the well. And we've all seen these before. We all know what we're talking about here. And they're not beloved by the horror community. Let's just get it out of the way. Generally speaking, horror remakes are widely maligned. People feel like they suck. They don't like them. They find them to be not really worth the time. No point in existing. Cash grabs, etc. And I'm not here to really dispute that per se, but rather just to examine the subgenre itself and just kind of figure out what is it about that makes the horror remake often, not always, but often fall short. What is it about horror remakes that turns people off so much? And I don't think I've actually cracked the code or solved the riddle, to be honest with you. But I do think that there seems to be 2 different kind of contradictory concepts when it comes to the hatred of horror remakes. And one is that it doesn't do enough to be different from the original. It's basically just rehashing the original, doing the same beats. It's not bringing anything new to the table. It's just updating the original movie and not really changing anything. The other seems to be that it didn't stick close enough to the original, that it went way too off on its own, that it's really just a remake that's using the same name but not really doing a remake of the original movie. It strayed too far away from the source material. And as you can see, those 2 things don't seem to align with each other. And what it leaves us with is something of like a Goldilocks scenario. This one's too hot, this one's too cold. It's got to be just right. It's got to be a lot like the original, but not too much like the original, but not too different from the original in order for it to be successful. It's a hard line to toe. It's a hard formula to get correct. And that's evidenced by the fact that so many horror remakes are just out and out maligned. And it's funny that studios keep going to this well. They keep going to mine material from old movies, slapping the name on it, giving it a fresh coat of paint, and rolling it back out there for a modern audience. And it really does feel kind of like a bit of a quick cash grab, because those movies will often make a quick buck at the box office, a quick opening weekend where they make their money back and a little bit of profit, and then dovetail immediately thereafter. And the critics pan it, the fans pan it. It never really launches some new franchise or anything like that, and it really sours the audience on the franchise as a whole. Nothing kills a franchise faster than remaking it or rebooting it, as they like to say now, because I guess remake is a bad word and reboot is somehow tricking us all into thinking it's something different. But it's a great way to stall out your franchise and burn up a lot of the goodwill that fans of the franchise have for it. At least that's kind of my perspective on it. That said, I don't generally hate remakes. I freely admit there are a ton of really bad remakes out there. Pointless remakes, boring remakes, uninteresting remakes, remakes that don't really make a lot of sense, remakes that don't feel like remakes. There's a lot of bad out there. And I'm not trying to argue that they're not bad. I'm not predisposed to hate a proposed remake right off the bat, even if something is a bit of a classic. Like, for example, I'm a big fan of The Crow, the movie The Crow, and they've done some pretty subpar sequels to it, but they keep teasing a remake. Sometimes it's with Mark Wahlberg, sometimes with Jason Momoa, and I love that movie. It's kind of a special place in my heart, that movie, and so I don't really want them to remake it, but I'm not gonna, it's not gonna ruin my childhood or anything like that. I do feel that people's visceral reactions against remakes can be a little hyperbolic, and I understand it. If you love a franchise, a property, like for example, I love Star Wars. A remake of Star Wars might not sit so well with me. I understand the reaction to it, but I'd say most of the time, the remake that winds up coming out of your beloved property is at worst forgettable, um, just benign. It really doesn't ruin the original, generally speaking, because the original's still there, and the remakes by and large just kind of get ignored, forgotten, or hated on. So I don't think there's anything to get too worked up about. But I respect the people who do. I bring them up because today we're going to be talking about some horror remakes that people hate. They really, really hate them. And here's the thing, I don't. I don't hate these movies. And so uh, this is going to be a bit of a bumpy ride, I think, because I'm not here to try to convince anybody that they're good movies. I do acknowledge the flaws and the failures of these movies. I just wanted to talk about them because I think they're interesting. I think there's something interesting about all of the movies that we're about to talk about that bears some examination. And uh, as a result, I decided to rank the movies that we're talking about today in order of how much they're disliked by the horror community, with postgraduate level being the most disliked out of the undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate levels that we're going to put them in. So why don't we go ahead and get started looking at these horror remakes and talk about how people feel about them and what I think we can learn from them. The first movie that we're talking about today, the undergraduate level selection, is Evil Dead. Evil Dead came out in 2013 and is, as I noted, the least disliked of the movies we're talking about that made the syllabus in this subgenre. In fact, it's actually rather well liked by most of the fans. It seems to have found that sweet spot we were talking about earlier, towing that line in the middle between being a lot like the original and enough of its own thing. But if you haven't seen it, the movie does follow a lot of the same steps as the original Evil Dead by Sam Raimi, where a group of people go into a cabin in the woods and wind up getting attacked by evil spirits. But there's a subplot about a friend who's trying to kick a drug habit, going through drug withdrawals, and that ties into the movie quite a bit, giving it a little bit of an extra layer. So, like I said, new aspects to the familiar story, and it balances it out quite well. The movie is directed by Fede Alvarez and won people over in no small part because of his decision to do largely practical effects rather than relying on CGI. It's something we didn't talk about too much in the intro, but a lot of these modern remakes or updated remakes of classic horror films like to use CGI because it's more advanced than the quote unquote dated gags and techniques and special effects of classic movies. But generally speaking, those dated effects hold up a lot better than CGI, which tends to age poorly rather quickly. Evil Dead eschewed CGI and went with largely practical effects for its gore scenes. There are, I guess, some exceptions. I know there's some people out there, and you know who you are, who have some quibbles about that, especially like some of the fire scenes at the end. But the production crew claimed that 98% or something like that of the effects are actually practical on-set effects. So take them at their word. And it looks like it. For the most part, the movie looks like it. It's got really great makeup, really great gore effects. It's a gruesome film. It's very visceral, very bloody. And as a result, really throws back to the original. The original is known as something of a gore fest, although the gore in that movie, as we've discussed when we discussed it back in our Demons video, was kind of campier or it was lower budget, so it didn't quite come off as gruesome. This movie had some money behind it, so the effects are much more realistic, much more gruesome, really intense, and it's a big part of why it won audiences over, in my opinion. It's definitely one of the things that won me over. Another thing about the movie that is really, really good is Jane Levy is the lead. Mia, I believe her character's name is, and she is great in the movie. I really like Jane Levy. She was also in Don't Breathe, if you've seen that, and she was in some sitcoms. I've been watching her for a few years now. I really think she's quite talented, and I liked her a lot in this movie. For me, and I know not everybody agrees with me on this, but I really latched onto her. I connected with her enough, and it might be again because I kind of went into the movie liking her a lot, so I was a little predisposed to connect to the character. But to me, she held the movie together. She really was a great role to have through the movie, somebody to follow. And what I like the most about her is that she is kind of the Bruce Campbell substitute in the movie, but she's not trying to be Bruce Campbell's classic character Ash Williams from the original series. She is her own character, but there are the similarities, some nods to that character, but she's doing her own thing. Once again, staying close to the formula of the original, but also forging its own path forward. It really finds that balance, finds that path perfectly. And I think that's why most people like it. Not everybody. The thing is, Evil Dead franchise is beloved. They are legions of fans. I want to call it a cult hit, but I feel like it's gotten more mainstream than that over the years. So hard to say that it's a cult hit, but it's got a lot of fans, and I'm one of them. And I think there are a lot of fans of it that like this movie, and there are a lot of fans that don't because you're messing with something that's beloved to people. Give me Bruce Campbell or give me death, if you will, and that's cool. I understand that, but there's one other aspect of this remake that I really like, which is this remake is a remake or a sequel. It doesn't really commit either way. It is entirely plausible that this movie takes place in the same universe as the Sam Raimi Bruce Campbell Evil Dead series. In fact, there is a Bruce Campbell cameo in the post-credit scenes that kind of reinforces this theory a little bit. Now, there's been some talk of kind of carrying out this movie franchise, maybe connecting it to the original movies, doing kind of the crossover or something like that. And I think they're still, to this day, planning on talking that out. I don't know where they are. It seems like there's a little bit of some news about it lately, but I'm not sure where they've landed on it. I would love this. I would love to see, first of all, who wouldn't love to see Bruce Campbell again in another Evil Dead movie? There was an Evil Dead TV show. That was a welcome return to the character for him. And I know they're talking about another movie, I think. I don't know. Again, I haven't gotten updated on the latest of the information. But if it's a tie-in with Jane Levy and Bruce Campbell, I'll love it. I think it'd be fantastic because even though this new movie has a more serious tone than the original movies, which were a little bit funnier, or a lot funnier if you're talking about Army of Darkness, I do think that you could blend them together pretty well. And I think that would be awesome. I would love it. I think that it would make it feel like just another installment in a franchise that is very enjoyable, another enjoyable installment in that franchise rather than a remake. And then at some point, if that happens, then I have to find a replacement for it on the syllabus. But cross that bridge when I come to it. I'd be happy to do that because I think it'll be a lot of fun. Suffice to say, I think that the Evil Dead is a good example of what a successful remake should look like. Updating the quality of the movie for a younger audience, but staying true to the original's roots, both in terms of story, narrative, and in terms of visual effects or just visual appeal, visual appearance. It really did tell its own story, but also retold Evil Dead, which coincidentally is kind of what Evil Dead 2 did also. It's a little bit of a remake of Evil Dead, but also kind of its own story. It serves as both a remake and a sequel, and I feel like this Evil Dead can do the same thing. At least I hope it does. If you haven't seen Evil Dead and you like the Evil Dead series, I think you'd give it a chance. I think that you have a good chance of enjoying it. There's, like I said, a lot of fans that do like it. It's possible that it's not for every fan. And if you're not a fan of the Evil Dead series, if you've never seen them before, seeing this one, I don't think would uh, diminish the experience of watching the originals or anything like that. And it might be a good way to get you interested in the series because it's a really good movie. It's pretty intense. It's pretty gory. It's pretty scary. It's a lot of fun. So I would definitely recommend the Evil Dead remake. And like I said, it's the least hated on this list. So if you're gonna watch one of these movies that you haven't seen, it's probably this one. This is probably the one to watch. So if you do, let us know what you think in the comments below. The next movie that we're going to talk about today, the graduate level selection, is Rob Zombie's Halloween. Rob Zombie's Halloween came out in 2007, and unlike Evil Dead, this one is really divisive. This is one of those movies that I'll go ahead and I'll call it controversial, or divisive is probably the better word. There are a lot of people who don't like this movie. If you haven't seen it, the movie is a remake of John Carpenter's 1978 original Halloween, as it follows the story of Michael Myers, a young boy who murdered his sister, gets put away in an institution, escapes from that institution, and then decides to go on a killing spree back in his old neighborhood of Haddonfield on Halloween night. And the original, of course, is a classic that is beloved by many and is considered to be one of the greatest horror films of all time. And I would sign on and endorse that comment wholeheartedly. Rob Zombie's Halloween goes in a slightly different direction. Instead of focusing on Laurie Strode, the character played by Jamie Lee Curtis, and all of the victims that are at risk when Michael Myers goes on his rampage, he decided to focus on Michael Myers. And the first half of the movie is a backstory of Michael and his home life and the external influences that may have contributed into his murderous tendencies. And I think that is why there are a lot of fans, many fans, most fans, hate the movie. The original Michael Myers in Halloween and in many of the sequels, arguably, is the embodiment of pure evil. He kills without reason. He kills without remorse. He is the boogeyman. He is just something that would come out and get you for minding your own business for no reason whatsoever. And that was a big appeal, a big part of what made him scary. Subsequent sequels in the series diminished that quite a bit by giving him motivations, humanizing him a little bit, things like that. But the original one did have this idea of him as the shape, just this cipher, this blank stare monster, boogeyman, shark, out to murder people. It was incredibly effective. It's a very, very scary concept that's done very, very well. Rob Zombie undercuts a lot of that with his movie by giving Michael a kind of a tragic backstory and making him a very realistic, fully fleshed out, well, maybe not fully fleshed out, but a fleshed out character. And I can see why people reject that because it is kind of untrue to the original version of Michael Myers. For whatever reason, they don't reject the sequels for the same reason, but setting that aside, I actually kind of love this movie. I really, 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 really like Rob Zombie's Halloween, and I know that is a wildly unpopular opinion. I'm not saying that it's as good as the original, not at all. Please don't mistake me. The original is in the pantheon for me. It's one of my favorite horror movies ever. This movie, I just really like it because it's trying to do its own thing. In fact, I contend that if this hadn't been called Halloween, it was just Rob Zombie making a serial killer slasher movie, I think people would have liked this movie a whole lot more. They just would have criticized it for ripping off Halloween. And I think that would be a fair argument. But I liked that Rob tried to do something different here. I think that the stuff about Michael Myers as a kid is great. I really enjoyed that stuff. Again, it doesn't feel like Michael Myers from Halloween, and I'm okay with that because I think it's its own thing. I feel like this Halloween really does get maligned from both ends. There are people that complain that it's not enough like the original because it's giving Michael all this backstory in the first half of the movie. The first 2/3 of the movie is more about Michael and his backstory. And then there's the group of people that complain it's too much like Halloween because, the final act of the movie is literally just going beat through beat of all the famous beats and moments in the original Halloween, just exactly the same. And both groups have an argument that's valid. I think the movie does kind of violate both these rules. It's too much like the original and not nearly enough like the original at the same time. And that's what's fascinating about the movie to me. It's like the opposite of Evil Dead. It did not thread that path between those two issues at all. It really just kind of like bull in a china shop, just kind of rammed into both of them. It started out by just not being like Halloween at all, and then at the end decides to just copy Halloween completely beat for beat, thereby ensuring that it was just going to piss off everybody. But it didn't piss me off. I found it to be very enjoyable. I do think that there are flaws in the movie. White trash Haddonfield is a bit of an issue. I talked about this before when I talked about Devil's Rejects. Rob Zombie kind of likes his trashy 70s style gritty unlikable character thing, and that's true here. The Laurie Strode in this movie, played by Scout Taylor Compton, is like a little more unlikable, a lot more unlikable than Jamie Lee Curtis's version, and her friends, including Danielle Harris playing Annie, they're not likable people, so you're not attached to them. But I don't think you're supposed to be. I think you're supposed to kind of be on relating to Michael. Controversial, I think, of Rob Zombie to try that, but interesting. And I guess that's what it comes down to is I felt like, unlike most horror remakes, which just are dull and forgettable, and you've forgotten them like right after you've walked out of the theater, this movie was memorable to me. It was interesting. It asked some questions, and I don't think it was 100% successful. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying I did enjoy it. I had a thoroughly good time watching it. I saw it multiple times, and I really admired the attempt. I think that Rob Zombie was tasked with an impossible task to try to remake one of the greatest horror movies of all time, and he went bold with it. He tried to do something interesting and somewhat unique, and then I think he kind of caved to some pressure, and at the end just kind of decided to start making a straight remake. And I kind of wish he hadn't done that, to be honest with you. I kind of wish that the story would have kind of gone its own direction completely, and it didn't. But I still admired the effort. I think he swung for the fences, and I thought he came up with a ground rule double. I think that it's a really fun movie. There are other Halloween movies in the franchise that I like more than it, but it's high up there for me, which again, I know is controversial. I know that there's a lot of people who out and out hate this movie. I see you. I respect you. I do not think that you are wrong. I just like the movie. I like it a little bit because of its messiness, because of its incongruousness, because of its very bleak, dirty, gross, white trash style story. It all I like Malcolm McDowell as the unsavory, opportunistic Dr. Loomis. I like that he didn't try to do a copy of Donald Pleasance, because that would have felt disrespectful. It's not trying to replace the original, and I appreciated that. I like Tyler Mane as Michael Myers. I like the big, hulking, giant, monstrously huge Michael Myers. I know a lot of people don't. I know a lot of people like him to be a little bit more lithe and kind of human-like and a little bit more regular size. But I find the bulky giant Michael Myers to be really intimidating. I actually had the pleasure of meeting Tyler Mane at a horror convention. Very, very nice guy, and if I can find it, I'll try to dig up the picture I took with him, because he dwarfs me. I'm not exactly a tall guy anyways, but man, he makes me look like a child standing next to him. He's so big, and it's really funny because he's such a sweet guy, really, really kind, really, really nice, but physically incredibly intimidating. And I think that comes through on camera. I thought he gave a good performance. Yeah, I like a lot of the elements of this movie. I acknowledge that there's flaws in it, but I liked a lot of what it had to offer, and I like what it tried to do. I liked the idea of seeing, the evolution of a serial killer from a small age. Again, I kind of wish that wasn't a Halloween movie. I kind of wish that Rob Zombie just made that movie, and didn't wind up turning into Michael Myers, but just wound up turning into a slasher, a serial killer. I think that would have been a very well received movie. I also think that he wouldn't have been able to get the money to do that movie without calling it Halloween. So I acknowledge and understand the business aspect of that. But I thought Rob did a good job here. It's one of his better movies, which, depending on how you feel about him, is not maybe saying much, but there it is. This is one of the few remakes that actually did get a sequel. Most horror remakes seem to stall out the franchise. This one did not. It got a sequel. Less said about that sequel, the better. As much as I enjoyed Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, or H2 as some people call it, awful, unwatchable. I know that there are a few people out there that really like it. Some people think it's better than his Rob Zombie's Halloween, but man, there's so many people, most of them, including me, that just find that to be a chore, awful, just incomprehensible. It seemed like Rob Zombie tried to get really artistic with that, and I wanted to appreciate that, but I was so excited when I went to go see that in the theater. And during the movie, I was just, what the hell am I watching? I was so confused and disappointed. One of the most disappointing movie experiences I've ever had. And then when when I've thought about it now, I keep thinking I'm going to go back and give it a second shot. Oh, maybe I just need to give it a fresh look, be a little bit less, dial my expectations down and kind of try to give it a chance. And every time I think that, I can't bring myself to do it. I'm like, nah, I don't feel like putting it on. I just don't feel like it. I'd rather watch, one of the other Halloween sequels, or the original Rob Zombie's Halloween, or, I can't bring myself to do it. I dislike that movie very, very much. But I do like Rob Zombie's Halloween. And if you haven't seen it, you've heard what I've said. You either are up for that or you're not. So I'll let you make your own decision as to whether or not you've seen it. But if you do watch it, or if you've already seen it and you have opinions, and I bet there are people who have, by all means, leave them in the comments below. I know that there's people that disagree with me, and I'm okay with that. Go ahead and disagree with me in the comments. Let us know why you dislike it, where it falls short for you, what the problems are with it. Happy to hear about that. And I think other people benefit from the counterpoints as well. I tried to be. I'm biased because I'm telling you what I like about the movie, but I also try to present some of the flaws in it too, to try to give as much of an unbalanced look at it as I could. But nothing's better than hearing it from somebody who actually has a strong feeling about it. So if you hate Halloween, Rob Zombie's Halloween, let us know in the comments below why. Be respectful, of course, but let us know. Be happy to continue the dialogue down there. And the last movie that we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is Gus Van Sant's Psycho. Gus Van Sant's Psycho came out in 1998, and if you thought that people didn't like Rob Zombie's Halloween, boy, buckle up for this one, because people hate this movie. If you haven't seen it, you might have actually still seen it if you've seen Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which it's a remake of, because it's literally the same exact movie but in color. Gus Van Sant decided to make his remake of Psycho shot for shot exactly the same as the Alfred Hitchcock movie, with the most minor of alterations, with the same script, with a new cast, and in color, but pretty much the exact same movie, which was a very controversial decision. So it's still telling the same story of a boy and his mother running a motel, and Marion Crane on the run after stealing money, who stops there for the evening, and maybe that wasn't the greatest idea. And, again, if for some reason you haven't seen Psycho, I won't spoil it for you, but again, if you have seen Psycho, you've seen this movie. Now, people by and large hate this movie, and I think it's because, like I was talking about earlier, it falls too much on the didn't bring enough to the table area of remakes, where it's literally just too much like the original, didn't do anything fresh or interesting. There's no reason for the remake, and that's true. I can't argue with any of that, but I don't hate this movie. I find this movie to be a very interesting experiment. And that's the word I'll use for it. It's an experiment. Do I think it's a bad movie? No, because it's Psycho, and I love Psycho, and it is Psycho. Do I think it's unnecessary? Yeah, absolutely. The original Psycho is fantastic. It doesn't need to be remade. It holds up extremely well, and I talked about it recently on the channel, so you can check that out and see what I had to say about it. But it holds up extremely well, so it's not necessary at all. But is it interesting? I mean, most people say no because it's the same as the original Psycho, but I say yes. I say it's fascinating to see what a new director and new actors can do with the same exact movie. The same script, the same scenes, the same sets, all of that. I find that to be fascinating. Instead of Anthony Perkins, you get Vince Vaughn playing Norman Bates. Is that a good idea? No. Vince Vaughn is horribly miscast in this movie. He physically doesn't even look right because he's kind of big and tall and a little bit physically imposing. And what I like about Anthony Perkins' version of Norman Bates is that he's not. Anne Heche as Marion Crane instead of Janet Leigh. Was that a good idea? Yes and no. I mean, Anne Heche at the time had a lot of personal, I say personal baggage, but she has, her personal life kind of, I think, intrudes a little bit on the character to negative effect, I think. But you've got Viggo Mortensen in the movie, you've got Julianne Moore, you've got a good cast in there. It's just, are they the right cast? I don't know. Not really, but I was intrigued to see them do something with those characters, to see a different interpretation of, to see a different version of Norman Bates, who is, bigger, stronger, and maybe awkward in a more unsettling way, is different, even though the words are exactly the same. And that's, I think, what appealed to me about this movie as an experiment, is it's interesting to see different interpretations of the exact same material. Now, again, people look at this and they say, totally pointless. Why do you want to do that? Why remake that? Doing exactly the same thing. I don't get it. It's pointless. It's a waste of time. But do they say the same thing about like Broadway plays or just plays in general? If somebody does Shakespeare and they do a faithful rendition of it rather than like a modern retelling or something like that, do people complain and say, well, why are you doing the same thing? It's the exact same thing as before. I feel like Gus Van Sant's Psycho is the equivalent of a theater play where you have new actors taking on the roles with a new director directing it, but it's still the same script, by and large the same sets, by and large the same beats, but just a different take. It's just seeing a different performer. Like if you saw Hamilton when it first came out and you see, say, Hamilton now with new actors in the role, is there a point in doing that and seeing that again? I would say yes. It'd be interesting to see what different actors do with the roles. That's what I think is happening in this Psycho. That's what I think gives it value. I'll use that word very loosely because, again, it's not necessary. I'm not trying to argue that it is. Just think it's fascinating. Do I think it works really, really well? No. Like I said, I think that the two of the main leads not cast well. Some of this the ancillary characters, the supporting characters, I think are cast extremely well. But Vince Vaughn in particular is a bit of a problem, and it makes Norman grosser than he was in the original. It's a little bit more obvious, I think, which loses a little bit of the nuance for me. But it's a different take and it's intriguing. I don't think it diminishes the original. I feel like I'm pretty good at separating the remake from the original. I don't think that the remake ruins the original. And as a result, I think I'm very forgiving when it comes to remakes in general. For those of you that have heard me talk about, say, the Nightmare on Elm Street remake and defend it, you might realize that I can be very, very forgiving when it comes to horror remakes. And this is an example of it. I don't hate this movie at all. That said, I don't really revisit it. I haven't seen it in a while, but I don't really revisit it because I don't need to. I'd rather watch the original. But it is fascinating to me. I remember when this movie came out being extremely excited about it. I remember seeing the poster and it said, come in, relax, take a shower. Great tagline. I was hyped for this. I like Vince Vaughn. I like Anne Heche. I was ever, making it in color. Yeah, sure, that's interesting. I'll check that out. And I don't think I felt disappointed in it just because it was a shot-for-shot remake. In fact, I thought that was more fun. I feel like this movie, as a remake of Psycho, was kind of doomed from the get-go because it's a classic and you shouldn't mess with a classic. But by doing like a shot-for-shot remake, Gus Van Sant basically made it really hard because you can't criticize this movie too much because it's exactly the same as the original. All you can say is that it's pointless, which it is, but you could argue that about every remake. Now we say that Gus Van Sant's Psycho was doomed from the get-go because you can't really remake a classic like Psycho and have it be well received. But then the Bates Motel TV show came out, which I thought was a horrendous idea, and it's brilliant. And if you saw my horror television video, you heard me talk about that at length. But it showed what a remake of Psycho could have been. It showed how to do something that is both very faithful to the source material and also fresh and original and new. It's another one of those ones that threads that needle, finds that path really, really well, the TV show. But and as a result, because that TV show exists, it's harder for me to defend Van Sant's Psycho by saying that, hey, what was he going to do? Like, he was tasked with an impossible task, just like Rob Zombie. Well, no, it wasn't actually impossible. Somebody else pulled it off. So given that, I have to admit that Gus Van Sant's Psycho is not really worthy of a whole lot of defense. It's really, like I said, more of like a bizarre experiment. It's kind of like just a fascinating thing to watch with kind of like this clinical eye of like, what the hell? Really? It's just kind of an interesting thing like that. It's just an interesting experience to just check this out, especially if you really like Psycho. If you're very familiar with Psycho, if you've seen it a lot of times, and you know the beats and everything like that, you know the shots. It's really fascinating to watch this movie and just be like, huh, because there are a few little differences to it, but you'd have to like really know the movie well to pick up on them. And you kind of debate, well, is that a good decision or not? It's really, to me, it's really interesting. Um, but again, just see the original. There's no real benefit to seeing this one other than I guess it's in color. If you're younger and you hate black and white movies, I guess there's no real benefit to seeing this one. So I'm not going to tell everybody go and see this. If you have strong opinions on it, let us know in the comments below. But I don't see. People hate it. They really are viscerally like anti this movie, and I don't know why. Because again, it's Psycho again. Like I said, pointless, sure, but get mad about it. Like I said, get mad about that the way you get mad about somebody redoing Shakespeare on stage. There's no reason to. It's just it's a shoulder shrug of a movie. But I find it fascinating to watch at least once, especially if you're a fan of Psycho. So if you haven't seen it but you really like Psycho, I'd be really, really curious to have you watch it and let us know what you think. And if you have seen it and are a big fan of Psycho and you have issues with it, let us know. Let everybody know in the comments what the issues are with it. Like I said, I think I've touched on what I think are the major issues that people have with it, but happy to hear again from the horse's mouth, people who hate it, what their issues are with it, so that everybody can be as well informed as possible. But as for me, I just find the movie to be fascinating. I can't help it. I can't hate it because it's such a bizarre thing to actually exist. It's so strange that it actually exists. So to me, yeah, I'd say watch it and then make up your own mind on it. So those are our picks for the syllabus for horror remakes, but we're going to talk about a few extra credit movies, and I should point out that these movies aren't so much maligned or hated by people. By and large, these movies are, I think, a little bit more well accepted or well received. But I figured I'd mention them here because I do think they're pretty good. I actually like all of these movies. The first one that I'm going to mention is the 2004 Dawn of the Dead by Zack Snyder. And the Dawn of the Dead movie, of course, remakes George Romero's Dawn of the Dead from the 1970s and updates it for a modern audience. And this movie, by and large, is pretty popular. I think a lot of people really like this movie. I think people were very surprised when the movie came out. People were like, "Why? Don't mess with an original classic like that." But then when they saw it, were really pleasantly surprised by how good it was because it starts out fantastic. It's got an amazing opening that just grabs you, and then it goes into kind of following the same pattern as the original Dawn of the Dead, and then at some point it kind of runs out of steam a little bit, if we're being honest. It's written by James Gunn, it's directed by Zack Snyder, and they have a lot of energy and fun with this movie, but it kind of peters out at some point, and I don't want to spoil the movie too much by explaining the details of it, but suffice to say that at some point additional characters start showing up and the movie starts to lose a little bit of steam. It doesn't go bad in my opinion. Opinions may vary on that one, but I never think it gets bad. It just doesn't actually sustain the really amazing, awesome opening. The opening of the movie, the first maybe half of the movie, is a ride. It's a lot of fun. And then unfortunately the rest of the movie doesn't quite sustain that level of fun. So it's just a little bit of an uneven movie, but overall I'd still say it's really enjoyable and fun, and it does have a lot of fans. This movie is not, I don't hear this movie getting bashed on by really anybody. I mean, there are people that maybe don't like it that much, but I don't think they get mad about it. I think most people would say that the original is better, but I don't think people get too upset about it. And I think there might be some people that say this one's better than the original. Sacrilege, but there are people that like this movie, and I like this movie a lot, but there's nothing to get mad at here. It's not as good as it could have been, but it's nowhere near as bad as it should have been, frankly. So if you haven't seen that one and you like zombies, definitely give it a shot. The next extra credit movie I'm going to mention is the 2009 remake of Last House on the Left. And the Last House on the Left remake remakes the Wes Craven classic from the 1970s. And it has the basic same plot of two girls that wind up getting assaulted and attacked out in the woods, and then their killers, who are escaped convicts, wind up at the house of one of the girls, where the parents realize that the killers have harmed their child and decide to seek revenge. And we'll stop there. I don't want to spoil anything, but I haven't talked about the original yet on the syllabus, but rest assured we will. So I don't want to go too much into the original, but let me just say in a nutshell that the movie is considered kind of a cult classic. It's an early Wes Craven movie. It's very well known and very notorious. But I think its reputation is overstated. It's maybe a little overrated. There's some aspects of the original that aren't great. And again, I'll save that for another video. But the remake kind of solves that problem. There's tonal issues in the original. It's an uneven tone, and I think the remake solves that problem by having a pretty consistent tone throughout. It's shot really slick and modern, whereas the original has kind of this gritty, grainy footage that makes it, to me, a lot more unsettling. The clean, slick remake, which is not just unique to The Last House on the Left, most of them have this. They lose something in the translation. They lose something in the the cleaner, slicker look, the more high budget look of it. The movie also pulls some punches a little bit. It changes certain plot points, significant plot points that make the movie a little less impactful, a little less gut wrenching. And so to me, the movie lacks a certain bite that the original has. The original really is a punch in the gut. It really is. And this one, less so. Good movie though. It's entertaining. It's fun. It moves at a good clip. It's well acted. The actors in there are very good. It's just like I said. It doesn't. If you watch only the remake, you would wonder why the original was such a big deal. You would wonder why people kind of clutch the pearls when they talk about the original, because the remake doesn't really show that very much. It's not nearly as impactful in my mind. But it's still not a bad watch. It's still not a bad time. And if you were uncomfortable watching the original, honestly, there's still enough in the remake to make you uncomfortable with certain things, sexual assault, stuff like that, some violence that's a little over the top. So if you're a little bit more squeamish, a little bit more sensitive, even the remake might be a little tough for you, but it's definitely more palatable than the original. So if you were always curious about it, but didn't really want to buckle down for the original, the remake's not a bad substitute for it. It's not a bad time at all, and by and large, the movie seems to have been well received. I don't hear a whole lot of complaints about it. At worst, I hear people think that it might be unnecessary, but nobody really seems to get too bent out of shape about it. I guess maybe because my theory is that the original is not all that well beloved, at least not really as well beloved. People might pay lip service to beloving it, but it's not. And so that's my theory as to why the remake doesn't ruffle feathers, but also because it's fairly well made and it's pretty good. So if you haven't seen that and it sounds like something that would be up your alley, check it out and let us know what you think. And the last extra credit remake I'm going to mention is the 2011 remake of Fright Night. And of course, the remake of Fright Night is the remake of the 1980s vampire movie. And if you haven't seen it, it's basically a boy is convinced that the new neighbor next door is a vampire and engages the help of a TV vampire hunter to try to help him defeat this vampire. The original is a tremendous amount of fun, and I love that movie. It's great. And the remake is also kind of great. And I know that not everybody shares this opinion, but it's a pretty popular opinion. This is not me going on a limb. A lot of people really liked the Fright Night remake. It was one of those movies that I think surprised people. Nobody expected it to be good, and it actually was really, really good. A big part of this is, I think, the cast. Colin Farrell playing Jerry the vampire, and Anton Yelchin as the boy who suspects him. Both bringing A games, and they're both really, really good. Anton Yelchin unfortunately passed away way too soon, but he was a brilliant actor, and he's showing some of that skill off here. Colin Farrell has mad sex appeal, and it works really well here. And I know that we had a discussion about this for Josh from Movie Timeline's channel when we were talking about horror remakes, and there was some debate about Colin Farrell versus Chris Sarandon in the movie, the original movie. And I think that's two different takes on the character that are vastly different and have different outcomes as a result. Even though the basic premise, the basic movie is the same, it has different ramifications or different feelings because of the two different performances. And I like that. I think Chris Sarandon is great. I think Colin Farrell is great. And I think they're doing two different things with the same character. And again, staying close to the original, but doing its own thing at the same time. David Tennant as the vampire hunter is the same thing. A very different interpretation of the same character that I thought worked maybe not as good as the original one personally. Roddy McDowall in the original is fantastic. But fresh, original, different, and it really cool. It's also shot really well. Some of the CGI effects, again, we talked about CGI earlier, and maybe they don't age so well, so they're not horrible, but they're, I wish it would have gone a little bit more practical on it. But I also like that they worked in like the housing crisis of the time. All these houses in Vegas. This movie set in Vegas, and how everything is kind of emptying out, people are moving out, things like that. And it was a way to add a modern social issue into the movie that made sense for the narrative and kind of fueled the narrative a bit, and added a layer to the movie that I thought was cool. It added an explanation to facilitate how some of the things that were happening, that made a lot of sense, and it also made for a really interesting setting, like this mostly abandoned housing tract. Wound up being really fascinating. I really like this movie quite a bit. I have mad love for the original. If you forced me to compare the two, I would say that I'd pick the original over this one. But you would not be wrong if you liked the remake better. That would be a fine position to have. It doesn't feel as dated, whatever. They're both great. They both have their own merits, and I think that you should watch both of them. So if you haven't seen the remake, see it, but see the original too. If you've seen the original, definitely see the remake. If you've only seen the remake, see the original, but see them both, because I think they're both excellent. They're both doing their own thing, but it's the same story. It's a really good example of what a solid remake could and should be. So once again, this is one that I would recommend without any caveats. Friday Night 2011, definitely worth your time. Speaking of your time, I appreciate you giving me yours as we went through these horror remakes. That's all we've got for today's video, but I do appreciate the time you have spent, and I appreciate any time you spend in the comments giving us your opinions on things. As always, I like to get your recommendations on horror remakes that weren't included in this video that you think should have been in there. I should point out that some of the really good ones are going to be discussed in other subgenres. So, for example, if you were thinking of an 80s remake of a 1950s sci-fi horror film set in Antarctica, that's going to get talked about. Don't worry. And some other ones will, if they haven't already been talked about, will get talked about in other places. But if there are other horror remakes that you think I forgot about, or that you think definitely worth mentioning, either as definitely see or definitely avoid, leave those in the comments, because everybody here, this little community is kind of talking to each other in the comments and giving each other suggestions and stuff. So please contribute to that conversation. We'd love to have you there, and I'm really enjoying seeing what you guys have to say. One other side note, yesterday I filmed my first collaboration with Noah from Hamburgers and Horror. My friend Noah and I had a fun discussion. I won't tell you what that is yet. It'll be appearing on his channel probably next month. I'll be telling you guys periodically just to remind you that that's coming up and to look out for it. And when it drops, I'll definitely make sure that everybody knows about it. But it was a lot of fun talking to Noah. Thank you, Noah, for inviting me on your channel. And I'm looking forward to you guys all getting a chance to see that. But until then, and until next week, we'll just say for now, class dismissed.